All right. Looks like we're going. Looks like we're going. Happy Thursday, everybody, and welcome to Get Your News On with Ron, the world's first viewer curated streaming news show. What does that mean? That means you guys tweet me articles at Ron Placone, or you put them in our Reddit subsection, or when we have a guest, like we have a guest today, you get your questions ready for them. And our guest today is Christopher Mitchell. He is with the Institute of Local Self-Reliance. And that website that we've been talking about a lot on this show is muninetworks.org. And what's your Twitter handle, Chris?
Community Nets.
That's right, Community Nets. And this is an important piece of our continued quest for municipal broadband. Municipal broadband is a task that I've taken on here where I live, Chris, particularly in the Pasadena neighborhood. And I actually have some interesting news for you about that I want to run by you. But we're going to ease into that first. Tell people in your words what exactly municipal broadband is and what Muni Network's role in that pertains.
Sure, I'd love to do that. I kind of start at the top with people talk about community networks, and we think of community networks as broadly networks that are designed to really be responsive to the community. And that takes two forms: municipal networks, Muni networks, as you mentioned, and then also cooperatives, which are more common in rural areas. Those are the two main forms. So there's a lot of different terminology, but that's how we sort of separate them out. And municipal networks are the kind of community network that are owned by a local government, usually a city, a town, sometimes a township or county, depending on where you are. And those have taken many different forms, from citywide networks offering all kinds of services, like Chattanooga is one of the most famous ones, to more modest networks, as Pasadena has operated for many years, where they're kind of focused on some businesses, and most residents haven't really seen a direct advantage from them.
So let's get into what you're offering communities right now. I mean, recently you guys made a post that you're offering different communities an assessment. Is that correct?
Yes, we've created something we call the Community Network Quick Start, and that is in cooperation with another company here out of Minnesota, where I'm based, in which for communities that are interested, we do kind of a basic assessment to really give you a real ballpark figure of what it would cost to connect all of the premises in a target area, all the homes and businesses, with fiber or with wireless or with both. So there's three different approaches that, if you give us a target area, we'll give you back a very assessment using a number of different assumptions that we work with you to make sure they're correct. And then on top of that, we give you some recommendations. We do a meeting with you to give you some guidelines. And the goal is that for a community that's getting started with this, rather than spending a lot of time and money and then only months down the line getting this information, we try to give it to you up front and say, in your community, you may not want to try to do what Chattanooga did. Maybe you want to try and do what this other community did, what Mount Vernon did in Washington, or something like that, to try to give people a sense of what their particular assets and challenges. And then the final thing I would say is, it's a commonly overlooked issue, but what are the actual goals? I think someone like you're pretty technical. You're probably, that you want to have high quality broadband available to everyone. And the question is, to what end? And in answering that, it will determine the business model and financing strategy and things like that, which may vary depending on the different goals beyond just having better broadband.
So let me break this down. As far as getting municipal broadband, and when we say municipal broadband, what we mean is the internet is a public utility in your community. Right. The communities that have done this: Sandy, Oregon; Chattanooga, Tennessee; Tacoma, Washington, they experience the best internet in the country at a reasonable price, because they cut out the corporate middleman, your AT&Ts, your Comcast, and they just serve the people. So
If you don't mind, I mean, I'll throw in there.
No,
There's still
please.
in the community because sometimes people get sensitive about this and they think
Mm,
that Chattanooga has kicked Comcast out of town. And what's interesting is you get a new choice. And so you can
hmm
take service without that corporate middleman. Or for people who prefer to go with Comcast, they'll often get better deals because of the competition. So
mm.
I'm just a little sensitive to that because we're talking about adding choice, not detracting from it.
Okay. Uh, I suppose that's noble. I, on the other hand, love the idea of driving them out of town. I love the idea of driving all of them out of town and putting all of them out of business. And then the employees, who it is not their fault, they can go work for the community broadband. That's what I like to see. But I
There's a,
understand,
there's a lot of people who share your opinion. I've
baby
certainly run
steps,
across.
baby
Right,
steps. I
right.
get it. But but so getting back to this, when getting back to the assessment,
Mhm.
there are a multiple number of ways that this can be accomplished in a community. For some, fiber to the home is the way to go. That is typically the most cost extensive
Yes.
way. Is that
Yep.
correct?
Yep.
But there are other options. There is also a mass wireless option. Now, is that what people refer to as mesh networks?
Some do, yes. Now, it's worth saying, I feel like there's still some of these areas are a little bit of a frontier. Fiber to the home is the most costly, but it's also something that it's well understood. Wireless approaches are evolving and evolving faster than I expected them to, frankly. We're seeing more opportunities because anyone who's been following this space for 10 years may remember Wi Fi, and there was an effort to do citywide Wi Fi, but the technology was not well suited to that. And the results were both public and private business models did not do well. But there are new wireless options that are doing better, that are more suited to urban environments. So that is an approach. Now, the mesh wireless, which we see out of like Red Hook in Brooklyn, and there's a number of these networks. There's one in Kansas City. They are typically more localized in a neighborhood. And actually, I should also just plug Portland has Personal Telco, which does a great job in Portland, Oregon. But those are typically not citywide solutions to date. Those are more of a volunteer run, in some cases hobbyist, in some cases focused on the digital divide. And that's also the case in Detroit with the Equity Internet Initiative. They do terrific work for that. So there's some different goals and there's some different experience with that, but we've not seen mesh wireless on a citywide level, to my knowledge.
Well, so I've heard a few things, and I'm still learning about that part specifically too. But you can probably speak to this better than I can. I've heard a few things in regards to the safety of mesh networks. Have you? Can you speak to that at all? Like, is that a proper thing to be weary of? Like,
I
it's not safe for people, or
I don't think so. I mean,
okay?
it's there's an issue that I wouldn't say definitively that we shouldn't worry about radiation and wireless in all cases. I think the issue that you might be conflating two things. One is the 5G wireless, which is coming out now, where if you drive down the street and you see a big tower that often has like three straight short antennas on it, those are typically what we call macro cells for our mobile wireless devices. In order to provide better service, carriers are moving from those sorts of big towers to towers that are closer to the street and maybe closer to people's homes. And there's a concern that that radiation coming off of them would be at levels that has not been properly studied. But I would say that in everything that I've seen in the scientific studies, that the number one concern that we still have about any sort of link with cancer is from these things, because the radio
Mm.
is right here and it's right next to your head. And so I don't think that even the small cells or the wireless mesh, I don't think there's a problem because mostly people aren't putting their head right up next to them for hours at a time. I think if you're constantly, even if you're always 20 yards away from one, the power level is low enough that I find it unlikely that there's going to be any sort of health problem resulting from that.
Okay. All right, so let's go down the other ways to do this typically then. So is it just there's just wireless via mesh networks where you have what are commonly referred to as super nodes, and that's basically just your big antenna with the internet connection, and then it goes into different wireless networks. They actually did a study up in Canada on what they're doing in different neighborhoods in New York City. I know Brooklyn's one of them, and I think there's a couple others as well,
Right.
where they're building the mesh networks. So that's one way to do it. There's also fiber to the home. Are there any other kind of mechanisms that communities can look into?
Yeah, I think it's worth noting the wireless actually has multiple different branches. The mesh approach is one specific branch, which is particularly good at eluding censorship. Um,
Okay.
it's it's harder for it's a non-hierarchical network, and so it's harder to monitor all the different links if there's an effort for either commercial or governmental reason to try to spy on people. And that's one of the reasons that people are often intrigued by them. But there's other wireless approaches that use other technologies. In San Francisco, there's a company called Monkey Brains, and in Boston, there's one called NetBlazer that use what we call point-to-point wireless, which is non-moving antennas. So we call this mobile wireless because I can keep moving around and be connected. Point-to-point wireless is 2 points that use wireless, but they don't move. And so you put it on a rooftop and you go from roof to roof, and you can deliver very high quality capacity there. We're going to see more of that, particularly in large apartment buildings in urban areas. So there's a number of different things that are coming about. But I'll say that I think fiber to the home is the end goal. It's the way to make sure that every home has a high quality connection, because wireless isn't magic. Wireless is typically taking a fiber optic connection and it's sharing it. And so if I take a fiber optic connection and I share it with 100 people, I'm obviously not going to have as good of an experience as if I'm only sharing it with 4 people in my household. Our goal should be to get that high quality experience as close to the user as possible.
Hmm. So, so here's getting back to coming full circle and getting back to what I'm going through in my community. So, when you guys put this offer out there and we're encouraging cities to apply for the assessment, I kind of thought I was going to be the matchmaker here, because the person in charge of making that decision here in Pasadena has been on your podcast before.
Right.
You have interviewed her. She is a woman named Lori, and I emailed her and I said, "Hey, look, what's happening? How can we get Pasadena involved? You know that I have this task force. I've shown up to a couple city halls. We have municipal internet on a city agenda." And I really thought this was going to be a big next step, and I was pretty excited. She emailed me back and she said, "No, we're not interested." And that was it. And, you know, I'm not trying to speak negatively of her. I'm just a little confused why there was such a split no, or such a quick, rather, no decision. It doesn't make sense to me. I listened to a podcast with you and her when she was talking about all the reasons to be optimistic for more expansion in Pasadena, and they haven't looked into residential yet, but it's something they'd love to look into. And she's all enthusiastic, and it's like, well, here's the opportunity, and you know this dude, you've been interviewed by him before, and nope, no thanks, don't want it. What happened with us is we showed up at a city hall. We got municipal broadband on an agenda. And so they did well, she would describe it as an in-depth study. I would describe it as a rather not in-depth study. But they basically, Beverly Hills is doing a municipal internet project. And Beverly Hills is, you know, among the wealthiest neighborhoods in the country. So they're just doing fiber to the home. No qualms about it. They can afford it. They're doing it. So the study essentially took what Beverly Hills is doing, applied it to the mileage of Pasadena in comparison, and said, we can't afford this. Didn't mention anything about net neutrality, didn't mention anything about other options, didn't mention anything about any other community in the country. Nothing. Just kind of said, AT&T's got our back. Spectrum's got us. Sorry, guys. And then I spoke and I pointed that out in a very diplomatic way. And I said, look, I think we need to continue this conversation. There's more than one way to do this. We can't just say, oh, this would be how much it costs because this is what Beverly Hills did. We need to look in other ways and do more assessments. They agreed with me, but it's like, here's an opportunity for an assessment. And we said, no, thanks. So I'm a little surprised and disappointed that my city government has been so non-supportive of this, and I don't know why.
I think I think your viewers should expect that similar results, frankly, especially on the sort of early stages. And I would say sometimes when people have that result, they'll get frustrated at a person in Lori's position. But the thing to remember is that Lori serves the city and has to take direction from city council. And sometimes there's a perception, oftentimes it's accurate, that the city council has not suggested that they should move in that direction. And so it's important to not put too much pressure on city employees who are often very risk averse and don't want to get out in front of city council on this. So I have a lot of sympathy for a person in Lori's position. But I'll say that when you're dealing with elected officials, one of the things we often hear is they feel like this is not a high enough priority for their voters. And to change their mind on that, you need to have more people contacting them, particularly people, that come from a variety of points of view, some from the business community, some from people concerned about net neutrality primarily, some who are concerned about low income access. You get a dime to basically say, oh no, it's not feasible, we just don't have the money. But the frustration that I have in dealing with that is that, as you said, there's many ways to go about this. Building a citywide network in the way that Beverly Hills has done is not the only option. If you look at I'm trying to remember the name now. It's escaping me. In Indiana, Auburn, Indiana, wanted to build a citywide network, and they recognized that they weren't in a position at that time to fund it. So they built out a part of the city, and then a few years later, they built out another part of the city, and now they have the entire city covered. So we need to make sure that elected officials are first aware of that, and then not using the cost of doing it all at once as a dodge to not even consider seriously other alternatives that would allow you to get there eventually.
Chris, you're very logical and empathetic, and it's very frustrating. You Minnesotans, you always have to be so friendly and understanding. Why don't you just go up to Canada? Jesus.
I grew up in Pennsylvania. I sometimes say that
really?
I have.
What part?
Yeah, so, Eastern Pennsylvania. I was born in Allentown.
Oh, I'm from Pittsburgh.
Oh, okay. So I was just out there, and
Oh, no
I
kidding.
love Pennsylvania. I spent 25 years in Minnesota, and I like to say I've retained enough of a jerk attitude from, not to say that they're all jerks, but there's just that edge. I've retained enough of a jerk that in Minnesota, I feel like I have a superpower that I can bring out as necessary.
It's funny. I love Minneapolis. It's one of my favorite cities in the country. I almost moved there at one point, but I couldn't survive your winters, man. Even growing up in Pennsylvania, that's a tropical climate compared to Minneapolis.
So just a quick aside, let me just note, I mean, since you grew up in Pittsburgh, the thing that I love about Minnesota winters is that we never deal with slush. When snow falls, it stays snow. It doesn't turn into puddles of water because we're so cold. And so it's a lot easier to deal with than people realize.
No, I got you. Well, not only that, but it's like you guys know what you're doing with it. Like you guys do not fuck around. Like nothing is ever halted in Minneapolis. Nothing. School never gets canceled. You guys just we're just using our little. You guys have those tunnels downtown, so it doesn't affect nightlife. You have like a heated walkway you can go through, and it's easier to say hello to people that way. And you guys love being friendly, so it's like it's just winds all around. And but no, I gotta say the Northern Plains. If I had to pick a favorite, and I don't like to pick favorites, but if I had to. I got to say the Northern Plains is my favorite region in the country to do comedy. It always has been pretty much since the beginning, and it still is. I love, Eau Claire, Madison, Minneapolis, Milwaukee even. I mean, those are just some of my favorite places to perform. So, yeah. And I'm I love the Replacements. I love the Replacements. I love the Hold Steady. So, yeah.
Kitty Wayne Shepherd,
yeah.
Yeah. I definitely have to come out next time I hear you're up here. I'm going to check it out.
Yeah, man. I'd love that. Well, then getting back to this, because there is a deadline right now, and I believe the deadline is Friday. Is that correct?
For the introductory offer. So we've announced that we're doing a beta period in which we're going to pick at least four, probably 4 communities in which they'll get reduced pricing. And so the way it works is that if you give us a block of 10,000 homes, it costs $4,000. We charge 40 cents per premises. That's for the normal pricing. For right now, for the reduced pricing, it's 15 cents per premise. So frankly, people that are interested, they have lots of time to work with us in the future. They may even want to just wait and see the results of some of these early tests to make sure that it's something that's relevant for what they need. But will be an
Yeah, we got to
ongoing
make sure you don't
process.
just show up to a town drunk or something and
That's right.
just. So this will be an ongoing thing then, is what you're
Yes.
saying.
Yes.
All right. Well, that's good to know, because I mean, all the stuff you described that I need to do and other people in my community and their communities need to do, you're totally 100% right. But that's not going to happen between now and the 29th, unfortunately.
No, that's good, because our pipeline couldn't handle it if all those folks did all those things by then.
Well, have you been getting a lot of applications?
Yes, we've had what I've expected. I mean, we've had a number of people who've reached out that are interested, like people like you, in fact, who've reached out on behalf of their local governments. But they're in a similar spot. But we've had more. We're gonna have to make hard choices fundamentally, because we've had enough people come in that are in the position that we're looking for, who are ready to get this information. So, but we want to start rolling them out pretty quickly. It's called the Quick Start, and so our goal is to certainly get back to those folks in the next few weeks, and then to post one or two of these studies.
There you go. Froze for yeah, just a real quick hiccup, and then you were back.
Well, I'm going to blame you, because I love this. We're on CenturyLink 100 megabit symmetrical. And,
nice. No, it's probably me. It's probably me. I'll take the blame. Southern California, man, it has its spotty moments. You'd think the capital of show business. That wouldn't be the case, but it is.
Oh no, I'm all too aware of it, frankly.
I'm sure. Oh yeah, I'm sure. So let's be honest here. Net neutrality, municipal broadband. These issues are about as sexy as a piece of decaying cardboard.
They used to be. I think that's better. Yeah, they
are getting better. How has the interest? Have you seen a recent surge in interest? Because these issues are. I mean, this is my issue. Like this is my issue that I've like. And when I say my issue, I mean like I've taken it on to really try to do something in my community. Right. Because I know how important it is. If you just screw over the way we can exchange ideas and information, we're done. Like we're done. So it's an incredibly important issue.
Right.
And I've taken it on because it affects my world personally. I've been paying attention to the media reform movement since 2004. I've been paying attention to net neutrality just as long. I'm not the tech savvy person, but I've been studying the policy a long time, and it's something I really freaking care about. Have you seen a surge in interest as of recent, as of the repeal of net neutrality?
We are going to test this. I've seen a surge. The question is it real, and how big is it? We'll find out on election day, I think. And so
why election 2020 or midterms?
Midterms right now coming up, and there's a couple of tests. There's a little bit longer I want to go into this, because I'm going to come off sounding a bit partisan, and I want to make it clear. In the work that we do, we work regularly with Republicans in rural areas, and on the ground, honestly, we don't see a difference at the local government level between Republicans and Democrats. People want to solve this issue. At the state level, it gets more partisan, and we see more of an issue where Democrats have tended to be in favor of net neutrality and have wanted to put more money into increasing broadband access, and Republicans have tended to be more on the side of the big cable and telephone companies. At the federal level, it's very stark, where it's almost all Republicans that I would say that are slowing broadband expansion in favor of. I mean, they would see it as improving it, but they're trying to get the money to the big cable and telephone companies rather than the ones who are doing the real deployment. So, but let me just reiterate: at the local level, we don't see a real bipartisan divide, but if net neutrality, if this is a big wave, what we'll see is Marsha Blackburn in Tennessee not getting elected, and where she's running for Senate, she's been one of the biggest pro Comcast, pro Charter, pro AT&T lobbyists. I mean, I'm sorry, I called her a lobbyist. She's a representative from the state of Tennessee in Washington D.C., and she's taken more money than anyone else from them. Yeah. She's been anti.
Sometimes it's hard to tell the difference. It's not your fault, Chris.
That's sort of what I was thinking. she's been very anti-municipal network. And there's people that have put up billboards around Tennessee saying, she's harming you on the internet. And so if people are going to go out and vote, and she loses in part because of people voting on net neutrality and internet issues, that's going to send a message. Because to date, neither you or I can name anyone who's lost their seat in any elected official at the state or federal level because of an internet issue. I think that could change this year. Marsha Blackburn is one.
That's interesting too, because one thing that I've noticed as of recent, I used to live in Nashville. I used to live in Tennessee. In fact, at the time, it was either going to be Minneapolis or Nashville, because I was a road comic, so I was traveling like 45 weeks a year.
Sure.
And we picked Nashville for a number of reasons, weather being a big one. But anyway, Chattanooga, that used to just sort of be a fun little fact that everybody was sort of just like, hey, by the way, this is neat about us. And you were like, oh, they have the best internet in the country here. How cool is that? Now, because I still travel some, and I did a Southeast tour in June, drove through Chattanooga on my way to Atlanta, and it is billboards everywhere. Tech City, Gig City. I forget the exact title they use, but they billboards everywhere. We are the tech city.
Yeah. $1 billion of economic development from that network.
Yes, and so now, I mean, they're screaming it from the rooftops, and all power to them. I consider Chattanooga one of the most underrated cities in the country. I think it's a wonderful, wonderful place. And yeah, now they're broadcasting it. So now, Tennesseans are really, really into this issue because they kind of have a hometown pride, if you will, about it, or a state pride, or however you want to put it. And it's typically it's a red state. It's a more red state, and I lived in the blue dot in that red state, but it's a red state nonetheless.
Yes, and actually Tennessee has this amazing legacy from the Tennessee Valley Authority, a lot of municipal power, a lot of cooperative power, and for electricity, many of them have gone into fiber networks. And there was a time in which there was 4 cities in the entire United States where you could get a gigabit of internet access anywhere in the city. 3 of those cities were in Tennessee. And the state government of Tennessee is trying to discourage them. The state would rather give taxpayer dollars to AT&T to expand internet access than let Chattanooga expand at no cost to the taxpayer to serve their neighbors. Mm-hmm. That's the kind of insanity that we've been seeing. And like I said earlier, no one's paid a price. And so the question for me is, we are seeing a wave of interest, but will that translate into political power? We'll start to get a sense of that in November.
So why do you think the midterms will be so definitive? Like, do you think that some seats could be picked off because of this issue?
That is a sense. And I think maybe one of the issues will be the exit polls, when particularly millennials are asked, why did you pick what you did? If they are saying because of this internet issue, because of internet broadband access, people will take that seriously who are in office. Here in Minnesota, the rural areas are generally represented by Republicans, and several Republicans have been quite clear that the rural areas would do fine with satellite internet access. Now, you're frustrated with what you have. I think you can only imagine how bad it would be if you only had satellite. But the DFL, to their which is our version of the Democratic Party, they've been terrible on this from a leadership level, and they're not trying to run as broadband as an issue. So I don't know that it'll be as definitive up here, but we see all this frustration across the state on broadband. And the question is, are people going to call their elected officials, and are they going to vote on this issue? And that's what I'm hoping to find out. But, the other measure is we are seeing more and more cities doing this. I just came from an event in Ohio, right near Akron, a city called Fairlawn, which built a gigabit. And we were talking about the network there. We're talking about Longmont, Colorado, where they built a fiber network.
They just passed it. And have they built it already?
Yeah, so Longmont was built. Fort Collins is the one that just passed it. Because
That's right.
Longmont has been so successful north of that Denver metro that a lot of other cities, so now Fort Collins has passed it. It looks like Estes Park and a couple of the other cities around there may do it as well. And
well, that's the thing.
Develop.
Sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off. But I just like that's the thing. Once this catches on, and that's why I know I'm going to face a lot of hurdles here in Southern California, because the cable companies, they fight back, and they fight back hard. Right. And they know that once one community starts rolling the ball on this, it spreads.
Right.
I actually made the analogy it spreads like wildfire, and then I kind of was like, that's not a good analogy to make in California. But
No.
so I try not to use that here. But that's what happens. And so, you saw this one town in Colorado get it. Then others followed suit. They found a way around the red tape legally, because, and I think the basic thing that happened was, oh, there was something in place with the cable companies, an agreement that we can't do this. Well, that was made when we still had net neutrality. So that agreement is null and void because we don't have that anymore. And that's kind of how they got around it, to my understanding. So I guess to just kind of put a number on it, how many communities, if you had to just give a ballpark estimate, are really looking into this now?
Hundreds. I don't think hundreds of them will start building in the next few years. To give you an idea, we have about 150 cities in which you can get citywide access from the city government. Um, on top of that, you have another 350, 400 where you can get some access if you're in the right area, right? If you're in the right part of Pasadena and you're a business, you can get
Yes.
dark fiber from the city. So
Yes.
that's one of the ones that we would count in that sort of lesser category. But I would think that we'll see, on the order of tens of new cities coming on, many of them each year. Tens of new cities each year. Many of them will not be citywide at first. They'll be starting off with pilot projects or modest efforts, and then over a period of several years, they'll decide to get more ambitious, most likely. If there's a significant economic downturn, we could see that. I think many of us are fearful of that in the next few years, so that could put a slowdown on the efforts. But right now, there's so much excitement and enthusiasm, in part because, I mean, if you're located outside of Longmont, you probably only have Comcast. CenturyLink is the competitor, but probably only offers slow DSL, because it does do fiber in more urban areas. But if you're in a smaller town near there, why were people going to buy homes there? The housing values are changing because even if you can get the highest quality service from Comcast, you're going to be paying almost twice as much for the service. I mean, in Longmont, you're paying $70 a month for their gigabit service, and elsewhere, you're paying like $140 a month for that same service if there's no competition. And so local governments have to prioritize this. When Pasadena, if Long Beach and Santa Monica and several of these other cities get more ambitious than what they've already done, Burbank, for instance, if they start getting more ambitious, you'll see Pasadena suddenly saying, well, this is a higher priority. So, you should be rooting for your neighbors to get going because that's going to create competitive pressure in the region.
Well, that's why when I started this task force, I did, like I said, like I live in Pasadena, so this is going to be my focus because this is where I live. However, this is all of Southern California because a victory for one is a victory for all.
Mhm.
And to my knowledge, and please enlighten me on this, Santa Monica is kind of the furthest along if we had to pick someone leading the herd right now. Is that correct?
That is correct. They've been doing to the businesses for a long time, and they've started wiring low income, what we call MDUs, or what we call apartment buildings. And so they are doing some residential. I don't know what their appetite will be for a more large residential expansion. But Culver City is jumping into fiber to the business. I think some of the cities, Hollywood, and maybe some of the cities around Hollywood, are looking at different models. So there's a lot of sort of tiptoeing around in your region, and I think it might be 2 years, it might be longer until one or two of them breaks, and then I think we'll see the dam break, and we'll see a lot more of it because there's just not going to be high quality competition to charter in your area. I think you're mostly charter in that area, and charter spectrum is what they call it now. People
Yes.
sometimes get confused,
Yes.
but and so it's not like in 3 years the cities will suddenly say, "Oh no, we don't have a problem anymore." Right? We're expecting this problem to get worse year after year,
Right.
frankly. Even as those companies improve their service, their speeds will go up, their customer service will be bad, their prices will go up because there's no reason for them not to. And so, I wish cities would move more quickly, but I think a lot of cities are hoping for a magic solution that comes along, and we just don't see that happening.
Yeah, you know, and when it comes to dealing with the industry, I mean, I think we're really on a good opportunity here. Like, I think you and I could kind of be good cop, bad cop. You know, I mean, you could go in, you could be like, "Hey guys, you know, this is just competition. We're just doing our thing here.
I'm
You
from
know,
Minnesota. I'm a nice
Minnesota.
guy.
I'm a nice guy. Have some cheese curds, right?" Then I could go in and be like, "We want you the fuck out," and like, and then we could just it'd be a nice duo. You know, I'm
I
available.
I think we're going to see that dynamic in more places as there are more movements. I mean, in Portland, it's incredibly exciting. In Oregon, they're creating a real movement, and they have two counties are looking at this seriously to figure out. That's a quarter of the population of Oregon
Hmm.
that are seriously considering what they can be doing. They're not going to build the entire county, but they're going to get started, and I think they're going to have good cop and bad cop in there along the way.
Yeah, I mean, in some ways you've got to, right?
Right.
Well, so what resistance have you seen from the cable companies? Like, do you have they? And I guess I don't know how much you can share, but have they kind of made an offer to like give you a fee to just shut the hell up?
They haven't.
Okay.
There's never been anything along those lines. I think they're some of the folks that are higher up may know who I am. I don't think most of them do. They're focused
I
on
bet you'd be
figuring out.
surprised.
I think, it's like there's like a lyric about, what if God's looking up too? Kind of like we all think like, they're trying to figure out their next big acquisition. They don't think that they face real competition. They're not
Mhm.
really worried about this. I don't think they're trying to figure out how to acquire each other and create bigger monopolies. So, maybe some I show up on their radar a little bit, but they're still not really threatened. In part because the more decentralized we are, the more they're just not going to pay attention because these are people on the East Coast typically, and they're very focused on hierarchical approaches, and they recognize, like if there's another big company they're competing with, that's what they're used to. But the idea of hundreds of cities taking a fraction of their business, that's just not a threat that they're like, I think they're ready to deal with, and they don't know how to deal with it. So in Colorado, for many years, well, we'll step back further. Longmont is one of the first big cities. Comcast comes in and spends a record amount in a local election to stop Longmont, and they win. But 2 years later, the city does the vote again because people got wise to the fact that they went through a con job, and they succeed. And the city decides to move forward with building this network that I mentioned earlier. Comcast says, you know what? We're done. We're not going to fight these referendums in Colorado. So 100 more communities in Colorado pass a referendum to say we're going to consider municipal broadband or a partnership or something like that. This is unique to Colorado, where cities can't do anything unless they pass this referendum. So I think Comcast then says, well, now we've had 100 of these votes. We need to figure out what we're doing. Fort Collins is going to vote. Fort Collins is like a jewel in Colorado, big, big, attractive city.
Yes.
And Comcast and CenturyLink say, we're going to spend almost $1 million to defeat this referendum. And they lose. And so I feel like they have this sense of like, well, we can't ignore it. We can't spend our way down. They're trying to figure out how they're going to oppose it right now. But the thing that we have in our advantage, frankly, is that their number one issue is California. They're fighting net neutrality state legislation. And so, from their lobbying point of view and their messaging, again, municipal broadband is like, it's like the third or fourth threat that they might face. They're focused on that number one, which is whether or not
Right.
Jerry Brown signs this bill in the next several days to make net neutrality in California a reality.
Yeah, you're preaching to the choir, man. I'm really hoping, and you know, and I think what really went down in Colorado was they legalized pot completely, and then after that, they were like, "All right, we cannot risk fucking with people's Netflix. We got to get municipal broadband. It's got to be the strongest possible. We can't deal with this shitty customer service anymore. I mean, and when you look at other countries, everybody that did it the right way first, they got the best internet. Everybody that did it our way, like Australia,
Mhm.
they handed it off to the corporations. Excuse me. Their internet sucks. It's like we should have done this. Like basically, what you're doing, and what I'm trying to help amplify is what we should have done in the first place.
I think so. And I think this is one of the issues that we're going to continue to face around net neutrality, for instance, and these other issues. I think net neutrality is incredibly important, but I am deeply worried about trying to say the federal government needs to protect the internet for all of us. I'm, deeply sympathetic with those who are worried about what the federal government does with increased regulatory authority. What I think we ultimately want
You're
is.
sympathetic with everyone, man. Do you do yoga? What's your
Oh,
secret?
I'm very not
I'm
sympathetic with
I'm
some people.
trying to chill a little more. No, I'm sorry,
So
please.
no, but I think so I've studied history a bit, and the 100 years ago, going through the progressive issues, right? And like you have this big issue of these rising monopolies and centralized power, and there's two things you can do. One is you build a really strong regulator in the federal government, and they try to stop those companies from doing bad things, and that's more or less what the FCC has tried to do. And the FCC has been a tool of business for decades, with the exception, I think Chairman Wheeler under Obama's second administration did a really good job. His first one was
Well,
terrible.
he was kind of pushed to it, though.
Absolutely,
Tom Wheeler
yes,
was a cable lobbyist, but the public screamed at the top of their lungs. And, Obama, to his credit, did the right thing. He did it in the 11th hour, but he did do the right thing
right,
and kind of caved to the public's will, loaned his voice of support, which made Tom Wheeler do, what should have been done a decade earlier. But
right. I don't want to give Tom Wheeler credit for doing what millions of Americans forced him to do. You're right about that.
attaboy.
Yeah, fight for the future, fight for the future, free press. A lot of those organizations, they did an incredible job
They
organizing, and
did.
they deserve that credit. But at the same time, Tom Wheeler's agenda that was often missed was very pro-competitive, and he embraced this idea. Um, uh, that's the second way to deal with centralized power, which is to break it up, and that's my preferred alternative. Is that I don't want to have a regulator that can tame Comcast so much as I want to figure out how to force Comcast to compete in all kinds of places. Because if
Hmm.
they don't have these monopolies, they don't have that money to pour into Washington, D.C. and the state capitals to get their legislation the way they want it. And so, like when you said doing it the right way, I fundamentally agree with you. Like the fact
Oh
that this is
no.
hard to
Oh,
do. Did I freeze again?
just one, yeah, one quick bite. It's like, yeah.
um, so what I think we want to do is we want to have a lot of overlapping networks, and so like that there's no centralized power, and so that's just where it comes back to as we're thinking about these issues. We're not going to be done with this in 5 years.
Oh, of
What I
course
want
not.
people to be thinking about as we're still dealing with privacy, as net neutrality, with broadband access, is can we do this in a way that creates a lot of local power and where we can call the shots, or are we just going to be giving Washington D.C. more power and hoping that the right administration uses it in the right way?
So let me ask you this, actually, since you brought up free press, and I too, I echo your sentiments on free press. I've been following them for years. They've educated me so much, and I've read most of Bob McChesney's books. I love the work he does. Um, as of recent, they seem to be, and I know they're policy focused, so that's the reason why, they seem to be very, very just policy focused. We're going to pressure the CRA to go through, or Congress will overturn the net neutrality repeal. We're going to pressure all the state net neutrality bills. And that's great. I'm for all of that. I'm
Right.
for every tool we can have to fight this thing. But I would like for them to also expand into your world. Has there been any cross pollination there?
They've always been supportive, and in fact,
Okay.
before I got known doing this work, um, they were doing it. Some of the papers in the early 2000s came out of Free Press, and they've always been a real supporter inside the Beltway of this sort of a thing. I think in some ways, I think some of the organizations in DC, they have too much of a hope that we can carry the municipal broadband banner. At the Institute for Local Self-Reliance, we're well known for this. And I think some of them have said, well, they have this issue covered, so we're going to focus on these issues of the CRA, which I could never do in terms
Right.
of really getting
Right.
this
Right.
stuff.
Right.
The other thing I would say that it's important to note, Free Press has really done a great job of working on racial justice issues
Oh,
and
absolutely.
a recognition that as long as we have this level of racial divide, we cannot solve our other problems. It's always used to divide us. And so they've done a lot of work on that outside of the Beltway as well. And I really want to, just to commend them for that.
Oh, totally. This was by no means meant to be a criticism of them, as much as just saying, like, well, when we're making these connections, it seems like they should throw some weight this way too,
Right.
because I think this is the permanent fix. I think that we're trying to hold the lines on net neutrality again, just like we did in 2015. We have a harder fight this time. We're going to have it again in 2021. So it's like municipal broadband solves it once and for all.
I wish.
Well, in
No,
time,
yeah,
not
no, I
right
agree.
away, but in
Yeah, no,
time.
no, yeah, no. I'll just say, I mean, this is one of those people have to remain vigilant, and this is one of the
Yeah.
problems is that I think municipal broadband is the best solution, but we have, and one of the reasons is municipal electricity. And you mentioned that Europe and other countries have gone beyond us. We basically invented electricity. We didn't invent electricity. It was there, but we discovered it. We harnessed it. We did all this great stuff to it. Europe were among the first to like really get it out citywide and make sure more people are benefiting from it. But then we came back, and even though we had took us longer, we made sure everyone had it, and that was tremendous. But in the course of doing that, we had like 5,000 municipal electricity cities, and now we have 2,000 because a lot of them have privatized. And this is sort of the ongoing work that people need to appreciate again is that it's not just a matter of getting the technology out there, it's a matter of who's making the decisions about it. If you look in New England, when Sandy hit, that hurricane snowstorm combination, I think it was, all of the places that had municipal electricity, they lost electricity for like 24 hours. The places that had electricity that had been privatized, these big corporations, they lost it for like 5 days, a week. And these are the sorts of things that I think are boring that I would ask your viewers and you to commit to is that like once we win and you have municipal citywide service in Pasadena, you have to check in periodically and make
Oh,
sure the
of
city
course.
is maintaining it. So people just need to be aware of that sort of a thing. But I'll say this: we lack imagination when it comes to spreading municipal broadband. People like you have tremendous potential to really get this out, not just regionally, but we could try to create a national movement. The person who started the Portland, the effort up there, he's has ambitions to really try and get more people out. The folks that did the Fort Collins referendum that defended it and made sure the cities passed it, I think they're interested in figuring out how to export this. I spent most of my time in this space just defending municipal broadband and not really going on the offensive. And so there's room there. And if we have a good plan that we wanted to develop, I think Free Press would love to help out and use their resources to that advantage. But we have been insufficiently creative in terms of pushing those sorts of ideas.
So I got just one viewer question here for you, and then we're going to kind of wrap it up with a call to action here. Andy wants to know, and I think you kind of answered this, but would you work with townships and very rural areas?
Absolutely. And we have some exciting models. I think municipal broadband is more challenging there, but there are cooperative models. And in fact, most of rural America will get high quality broadband. They might get it before you do in Los Angeles because the cooperatives are really picking up. The ones that brought electricity to rural areas, the ones that brought telephone, they're doing a great job. And in some areas of the country, rural independent telephone companies are doing a great job too. So there's a variety of approaches depending on where you were. There's different models. If he wants to reach out to me, I'm very happy to give him some models and to offer some advice. As you said, muninetworks.org. If you can't find me on there, I'm doing something wrong. You should be able to find an email address in the About Us to reach out to us.
So then to close here, what can people do?
Well, they need to talk to their elected officials. Call your city council members, township, commissioners, county commissioners, state elected officials, and federal folks. But I would say create a local movement, create a mailing list so that you can quickly activate people when something comes up to say, you know what, like this thing on net neutrality is a big thing in the headlines. Let's make sure we're talking to all of our elected officials and divide them up and meet with them where possible, but make sure they know that this is an issue. I would say send our podcast to the local officials in your city that are supportive of it. There are, even if the local officials can't take a public policy, a public stance on an issue, they may be really interested in passing information along and trying to educate the city council members. So I run Community Broadband Bits, which is conversations with elected officials often on how they've done this. Spreading those to other elected officials can be helpful. But it's really about organizing and making sure that you have these connections so that when there's an opportunity, if there's going to be a vote in city council, if you're going to have a meeting, that you can get people out there to demonstrate support for it.
All right. And please plug all those websites one more time before we close here.
Sure. So I run muninetworks.org, M-U-N-I networks.org. I'm on Twitter at CommunityNets. I run Community Broadband Bits podcast. We have a bunch of fact sheets, videos. Oh, I didn't even talk about the videos. Fiberfilmfestival.com. So we have curated several long videos. They're great for local meetings. Have a local meeting, advertise it around, let people know on Reddit, and go out to a brew pub to watch one of these short videos for 20 minutes and then have a conversation about it. So we talk about Sandy in there, which you mentioned. So there's all kinds of things. And then we started the Community Network Quick Start, which is cnquickstart.com, for people who might be really they're willing to pay some money to get some actual numbers as to a ballpark for different network deployments and some advice based on their situation.
That's incredible. I didn't even know about the film series. I'm going to have to dive into that now and share it with my group. And awesome. Well, Chris, thank you so much for doing this. And thank you so much for everything you're doing. Yeah, I'm glad we're connecting, and hopefully this continues, and hopefully I make a little bit of I cover a little bit of ground in Pasadena. If you and Lori are still tight and you want to drop her an email and say, "Hey, I'd love to come out," feel free to do that.
Yeah, well, I'll be in Ontario. There's going to be a fun event in Ontario, California.
I know I'm going to be in Europe, unfortunately.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
So if folks want to come out or drop me a line, I'll see what we can do.
All right. Thank you so much for doing this, man. Guys, this has been Get Your News On with Ron, the world's first viewer curated streaming news show. I will be back Monday at 10 a.m. Pacific Standard Time. In the meantime, you know the drill. Tour dates coming up. November 2nd, Sacramento. November 3rd, San Francisco. Get your tickets now, because we're almost out of them in a couple places. Get your tickets now. November 10th, Austin, Texas. November 23rd, Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. January 11th, Orlando, Florida. January 9th, Gainesville, Florida. And we're still locking in some Florida dates. RonPlacone.com for all those tickets. Oh, and November 4th, Santa Barbara, California. Details available soon. If you want to support the show on the sustainability end, patreon.com/RonPlacone. Give what you can level. You get all kinds of perks and benefits, and it's fun. And I'm real close to a new goal. Yay, Christopher. Thank you so much again, man. And what you're doing is incredibly important. And we will be in contact. And say hi to the Grain Belt Bridge for me.
I'll do that. Thanks for having me.
Have a good weekend.
Take care.
Take care, everybody. Peace.